Before learning how to fix your knits, it's really important that you understand the structure of what you're trying to fix, because it will be like breaking a vase and then just sticking all the bits back together. It just doesn't work. And with knitting, it's quite similar. So the first thing is we've talked about before are the V's of the stitches. So this is stocking stitch, and then the different rows as well. So you have the columns of V's, so we see them here, and then we have the rows of V's. So you have your rows and your stitches. And understanding that structure when you're starting to fix your knits is really, really important. So understanding that the front of your stitch looks like a V, but on the back it has a bump at the back. So when we turn that over, you can see that it is the loop of the stitch that goes up and down. And the reason that's important will become really obvious when we start picking up stitches. So understanding why one stitch links to the other. It's also useful to understand how the stitches link to one another. So it's the V's and the loops are linked together by stitches that go between them. And on the back of the work, they are slightly offset from the top of the stitch. So they are the V at the front, the loop above, and then the attaching piece below. And it's really useful to understand that because we will eventually be putting our stitches back together. So knowing what that looks like is really important. It's also important to look at the structure of garter stitch because it's different. So I knit my row and my bumps go to what looks like the back, but actually you'll see that you can see the top of the stitch, and that is because the next row is also knit. And as when we were knitting garter stitch, you know that with a knit stitch the bump always goes to the back. So your bump goes to the back on one row and it goes to the back of the other, which means they're on opposite sides. And that's why it's different to stocking stitch, because you're knitting one and purling one, which means the bumps are on the same side of the fabric. So you'll see here that they're columns of V's, whereas here you'll actually see that they're a loop at the front, a loop at the back, a loop at the front, a loop at the back in the columns. Looking more closely at a column of stitches, you'll see that it's one to the back, one to the front, one to the back, one to the front. And we will see a lot more of that when we start to fix the garter stitch. It becomes much more obvious, but I do recommend that you take your garter stitch now and trace a column of stitches up along it so that you can see how that's formed in garter stitch. The next important part of the structure is to make sure that you understand how your stitches are mounted or how they sit on the needle. In general, the right hand leg of the stitch should be at the front of the needle and the left leg should be at the back of the needle. And what you can see here is when I swap them around, they don't look quite as comfortable. Also, if they're completely wrong, they'll be twisted. So that's not right either. So when you are putting stitches back, having repaired them, you want to make sure that they're mounted on the needle correctly. And that's really key, because otherwise you will get twisted stitches in a way you don't want. Now, I do need to say that there are patterns where you have twisted stitches, in which case you'll have to twist them when you're fixing them, but we're going to start with what happens when you have the leading leg at the front and the next leg at the back. And those are the two really important structural things you need to know: the stitches and columns, and also how the stitches are mounted on needles.